1934. For a year and a half now, the Germans have been living under the heel of Adolf Hitler. All it took was a few months for him to destroy democracy. Freedom of the press and all civil liberties have been abolished. Opponents have been thrown in jail. The Nazi Party has become the only party. But despite all the repression and violence, Hitler's power remains fragile. He's torn between the two forces that brought him to power. On the one hand, the conservatives. On the other, the party revolutionaries. Among them, the members of the SA, the assault section, the paramilitary group of the Nazi Party, who now number 4 million. At their head, the other great figure of Nazism, Ernst Röhm, their charismatic leader, who was one of Hitler's first brothers-in-arms and one of his very few friends. Under Röhm's leadership, the SA contributed to the seizure of power, and now they intend to continue the great National Socialist Revolution, faithful to the anti-capitalist spirit of its beginnings. The conservatives, the major industrialists, the traditional army, like some leaders of the party now in power, can no longer tolerate this SA that Röhm is keeping in a mindset of revolutionary violence. But Hitler's still not ready to sacrifice his old friend, Röhm. On the evening of Friday, the 29th of June, 1934, given the urgency of the situation, Hitler interrupts his official trip to the west of the country. With his entire delegation, he moves into the Dresden Hotel near Bonn. It is Göring, the regime's number 2, Himmler, the leader of the SS, and Heydrich, his deputy, all members of the Nazi inner circle, who will deliver the coup de grace against one of their own by cooking up an alleged attempt by Röhm to overthrow Hitler. They mobilize the most formidable of the Nazi units, the SS, and its intelligence service, the SD. Hitler can tread water no longer. He decides to take action. He leaves the Dresden Hotel to confront Röhm personally. And so begins the extraordinary criminal operation by the state itself that has gone down in history under the name of the Night of the Long Knives. At 2 in the morning, a plane takes off from Bonn with Hitler on board. The Führer is surrounded by his close guard, the Bruckner, Schreckschaub, all those who have been following him for more than 10 years and would be willing to die for him. Some have accompanied him since he left Berlin. Others joined him at the Dresden Hotel. They won't leave him again until the end of the operation. For Hitler, the time for questions and reflection is over. He's now all action, and all focused on his goal, the arrest of Röhm and his companions, and gaining control of the SA. After more than 2 hours of flight, the plane lands in Munich, the capital of Bavaria. Local party leaders and others who've been summoned in the night are there to welcome him. There's no time to waste, and their cars all speed towards Munich in the wake of an increasingly nervous Hitler. On the road to Munich, Hitler rages against the SA, whom they now call pigs, as the SS have been doing for several months. Then he falls silent. He has to act quickly now and take everyone by surprise. Hitler heads directly to the Bavarian Ministry of the Interior. In the offices of the ministry, some people have been notified from the Dresden Hotel of the Führer's arrival and sworn to secrecy about the coming operation. Others still have no idea. Hitler immediately summons Munich's 2 most senior SA officers, General Schneidhuber, who is also the chief of police, and General Wilhelm Schmidt, a member of the Reichstag, a party member since the very beginning and who participated in the 1923 Putsch alongside Hitler. That doesn't matter now, though. As soon as Hitler sees them, he rushes at them, rips off their military insignia and decorations, and shouts at them, "Traitors, you're under arrest. You will be shot." They're both taken to Stadelheim prison, where they will be executed.
Also hat sich selber in eine Art von Rage hineingesteigert, in eine Art von Ausnahmezustand, in dem er überhaupt erst in der Lage war, gegen Leute vorzugehen, mit denen er ja jahrelang eng zusammengearbeitet hatte.
In his rage, Hitler can't remain in one place. He leaves the ministry, too impatient to wait for the SS companies to arrive from Berlin. With no more than 15 of the faithful, he leaves Munich and heads south to Bad Wiessee, on the shores of Lake Tegernsee and Röhm. His modest convoy, 3 or 4 cars at most, speeds through the dark forests of the Bavarian Alps in gloomy silence. Hitler has decided to go to the Hanselbauer Hotel to confront Röhm in person.
And one of his plans was probably that he had to go there himself, because if there were any problems, he'd be able to resolve them with his authority as Chancellor.
Hitler can't anticipate exactly how events will unfold. He's targeting people of significant stature who have considerable political weight within his own movement. Things could go wrong. They might refuse to carry out his orders.
L'affaire va mal se passer et que des gens vont refuser d'exécuter ses ordres.
The best way to avoid that danger is to go there personally and take care of things himself.
Pourquoi est-ce qu'Hitler fait ça? Parce qu'il veut battre.
Why does he do that? Because he wants to beat Rome on his own turf. What is a Führer? A Führer is a military leader. The word itself means the man who drives. Führen, who leads men into battle.
Qui conduit les hommes au combat. Röhm est l'archétype du Führer.
Rome is the archetype of the Führer, a dog of war, a trench pig, a man who lived to lead his men to battle, to death, to victory.
À la mort, à la victoire. Hitler veut faire la même chose.
That's what Hitler wants to do, by showing himself at the head of his men in the early morning in Bad Wiessee. He wants to show his antagonist that on his own turf, he's the strongest.
Il est le plus fort. Et que
and that Hitler does not back down. He leads his men into battle just like Rome.
Comme Röhm.
As he approaches the Hanselbauer Hotel, Hitler knows full well that he'll find a lot of SA staff there. He wants to be there to surprise everyone when they wake up and to net them all in one swoop. Hitler and his men burst into the hotel. They break down the doors of the first rooms and brutally seize all the stunned, dazed, and sleepy SA they find there. Among them is SA number 2, Edmund Heinz, a member of parliament. He is arrested in the bed he's sharing with 2 other men. Count Hans Erwin von Spreti-Weilbach, Röhm's lover and aide de camp, and Julius Ewell, the chief of staff, with a reputation as a killer, are both arrested along with about 15 other SA officers. Then, Hitler heads for Röhm's room. He knocks on the door and keeps frantically knocking until finally a half-naked, half-asleep Röhm opens it. The Führer stalks into the room, pistol in hand, and proceeds to arrest Röhm himself. It's 6:15 a.m. when Hitler leaves Bad Wiessee with his prisoners. The operation has lasted no more than 10 minutes.
Là, on est véritablement en plein dans Bertolt
It's really
Brecht.
like a play by Bertolt Brecht, Hitler the gangster, the Nazi mafia, Bavaria like Chicago for that operation.
L'idée d'un Hitler en
The idea of a Hitler in a raincoat and trilby, revolver in hand, leading his men himself to go and kill these guys. Not Rome, but a lot of his companions. It's an absolutely astounding image. It's the heart of the 20th century in the heart of Europe. And there's this head of government running an assassination operation, a mafia gangster operation.
D'assassinat, une opération mafieuse de gangsters.
C'est surprenant.
It's surprising, Hitler as this pack leader. For any other head of government at the time, it'd be surprising. For Hitler, given the nature of his power and what he's always done, it's a direct continuation of his own practices.
Ces hommes ne partent à l'assaut.
These men only go on the attack for two reasons. First, because the colonel himself is prepared to put himself on the line. And secondly, because they already have the experience that this colonel will bring them home alive. And that's the reason, and the metaphor, attack and war. That worked for me. They explain how Hitler sees himself at those times, that he actually sees himself as the Führer and the man of the moment, etc. But he also sees himself as a warlord. So that internal war with Nazi militancy, that assault, was something he had to lead it himself.
No sooner has he returned to Munich than Hitler hands Röhm over to the SS at Stadelheim prison. The SS unceremoniously drag him through the corridors, past the cells where his companions are locked up. At the end of the building, the corner cell is reserved for him. Once Röhm is in jail, nothing can stop the relentless machine of repression. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. Hitler's back at the Bavarian police ministry. At that moment, there are thousands of SA arriving from all over Germany for the great convention that Hitler and Röhm had decided to hold. They're all going to be there in town, and no one can predict how they'll react when they hear of the arrest of their leader. To avoid any trouble with the SA, Hitler orders the SS to two strategic sites: the railway station, where some of the SA are arrested on their arrival, and the Brown House, the headquarters of the Nazi Party, where any SA who had begun to gather found themselves trapped.
On the night of the long knives, Hitler will tell 500,000 or more people to just shut up. The SA, that is, the body of the SA before the seizure of power. That's really something. They could have taken up arms. They could have taken control, the center's power, etc. But the SS will disarm that. The SS take possession of the telegram bureau, the post offices, all the strategic places of power to prevent a possible revolt by the SA.
In Munich, the situation's under control. At 10 a.m., Hitler sends Göring and Himmler the code word Kolibri. It's the signal to launch operations in the rest of the country. SS killer squadrons receive their mission dispatches, all sealed with a swastika. They contain the names of the people to be arrested and executed by order of the Führer.
They also order that the Reichswehr and the Gestapo intervene only as support and limit themselves to security. The Reichswehr and the Gestapo are both state institutions, while the SD, SS, and the Leibstandarte belong to the party. And the heads of the SD's executive offices then send lists to Berlin, where Heydrich, Himmler, and also Müller are stationed. All three are notified via telex how to proceed. A cross by a name means either that that person is to be executed or imprisoned, or is to be left alone.
He let go the horses.
He let go of the horses in a very controlled way on a number of people.
Très contrôlé sur un certain nombre de personnages, c'est-à-dire que en Silésie, par exemple.
In Silesia, for example, he says to von Watch, "Help yourself."
Fais ce que tu as envie de faire. Et là, dans ce cas-là, les
And so the SS massacres several dozen SA activists.
de militants SA.
And it's an information society, so everything that happens in Silesia is going to happen elsewhere. He organizes a crackdown that is quite indiscriminate, and that will cost the life of at least 70 or 80 SA dignitaries. They will be replaced in a total change of structure and purpose for the SA. From a revolutionary militia, it will become a kind of framework and accompaniment structure of society. At the same time, by targeted but very significant assassinations, it makes it clear to other forces that if they try anything at all, this may happen to them.
It was probably Göring and, of course, Hitler who decided. Hitler certainly didn't let Himmler and Heydrich decide on their own who was to be murdered. He wanted to be the one to choose. In Munich, he had already ordered the assassination of several senior SA leaders. And the next day in Berlin, he tacked on a list of 60 other names of people to be executed. Röhm was not on either list. Hitler obviously still had some scruples about killing one of his oldest companions, not for sentimental reasons. But simply because he was worried about the impact on public opinion of the head of the German government, having his own minister assassinated.
It is doubtful that, alone in his cell, Röhm ever accepts the idea that Hitler has betrayed him. Hardly 6 months ago, Hitler wrote to him in a letter he released to the press. I must thank you, Ernst Röhm, for the inestimable services you have rendered to nationalism and the German people. Know that I am grateful to destiny, which has allowed me to call such a man as you my friend and brother in arms. With all my friendship, all my gratitude, and all my respect, your Adolf Hitler, 31st of December, 1933. Starting at 5 p.m., Röhm can hear the first executions taking place under his window in the prison yard. One by one, they are shooting his companions. Each execution is preceded by the sentence, "The Führer commands it. Aim. Fire," pronounced by Sepp Dietrich himself, the commander of the most prestigious SS unit, the Lebensstandard, the embryo of the future Waffen-SS.
The ones they execute here are putschists, and therefore traitors. And putschists, and therefore traitors, are executed by firing squad. And secondly, it is a military affair between soldiers, within a military framework. And the mode of execution in military law and in the code of procedure of the German army is by firing squad. And so the way they're killed here is also a message to the people in the know. This is between people who know each other well, people who share the same ethos. So it's a firing squad. Other people are just killed without ceremony. This is political assassination. And in this particular case, they don't bother to take them to prison. They just put a bullet in their head like they would with any old communist.
All over Germany, in Prussia, Bavaria, Silesia, Pomerania, there are arrests and executions. In Berlin, the capital, fusillades of shots ring out all through Saturday and Sunday from the Lichterfelde barracks. Foreign diplomatic delegations housed nearby hear them and make requests to the Chancellery for information. They go unanswered. Nobody knows the number of victims. Especially since on Monday, the 2nd of July, the day after the operation, all the files related to this outburst of political assassinations are destroyed. The Purge is not confined to the SA. Hitler, Göring, and Himmler use it as an opportunity to assassinate others they consider a threat to their power. In their orders, the SS execute, in his office, the Vice-Chancellor Herbert von Bose, who wrote von Pappen's famous Marburg speech. Several others close to von Papen are also shot dead, soldiers such as Brigadier General Ferdinand von Bredow, and conservatives like former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher, and the leader of Catholic Action, Erich Klausner, the figurehead of opposition to Nazism. Just 5 days ago, he gathered together 60,000 people in Berlin to demonstrate against Hitler. Today, he lies there in a pool of blood, shot in the back, an assassination that will be disguised as a suicide.
Violence is, in a way, the lifeblood of National Socialism. Everything that can't be solved in a simple way ends in violence. This is, in fact, the basic principle of all totalitarian regimes, but especially of National Socialism.
The Dachau camp, a few kilometers from Munich, is the first Nazi concentration camp. It is created by Himmler in March 1933 and placed under the direct control of the SS. Many SA members are brought there to be executed before the eyes of the political prisoners who were already there, and who quickly understand that scores are really being settled between Nazis, SS against SA. Josef Eckstein, imprisoned in Dachau in May 1933, has seen it all from there in his barracks. He left a written testimony, kept in the camp archives. From the lower and the middle bunks, you could clearly see what was going on. On Saturday around 5 p.m., the first 2 victims arrived at the camp. The SS hit them with all kinds of objects. Suddenly, shots rang out, and the 2 men collapsed. The SS were in a bloodthirsty rage. They were screaming, applauding. They had gone crazy. They went to get ropes to tie around the feet of the victims and dragged them behind them for a quarter of an hour, spitting on their inert bodies. All night long, the shootings continued. Every time a man fell, the SS screamed with joy. On Monday, 33 bodies were put in a mass grave, all entirely naked. Then they were covered with quicklime, then earth.
Mais les gens qui vont dans les camps de concentration.
But the people who go into the concentration camps after June 30th, 1934, and who go to Dachau, are destined to come out. People are intentionally taken to Dachau and beaten up. Then they're let out and told not to speak a word of it, because they know very well that they will tell all about it. And that's how you spread the terror, you see.
Le Troisième Reich, il a fait quoi?
By doing this, the Third Reich shows it's capable of enforcing order by resuming the violence and confining it to the concentration camps, while at the same time reasserting it by letting it out of those places and into the social networks, so that it can penetrate every level of German society.
Jusqu'au tréfonds des couches sociales de l'Allemagne.
Berlin, Sunday morning, 1st of July. Hitler has flown back from Munich the previous evening. Göring and Himmler join him at the Chancellery and urge him to sign Röhm's execution order. For more than 24 hours now, the SS has been imprisoning or murdering everybody on their lists. There is only one case left to settle, that of Röhm, the first to be arrested the previous morning. Hitler hesitates to have him killed. But Göring and Himmler want his head, and they'll get what they want. At 1 p.m., Hitler gives in, but on one condition, that Röhm be given the choice of suicide to save his honor as a soldier. Himmler phones Theodor Eicke, a Nazi soldier he has appointed as director of Dachau. It is to this close confidant that he gives the mission to execute Röhm. In cell 474, Röhm sits shirtless on an iron bed. Eike hands him a gun and gives him 10 minutes to commit suicide. Röhm refuses. So Eike orders the 2 SS there with him to shoot him, then finishes him himself with a shot to the chest.
I don't think
Röhm, with his moral values and his belief in his relationship with Hitler, expected something like that. He probably died thinking that other elements were behind his assassination, not Hitler himself.
Hinter seiner Ermordung stehen und nicht Hitler selber.
Y a quelque chose d'originel.
There is something original and primal in the Night of the Long Knives. It represents an abrupt transition both in the exercise of power and the dynamics of the rise to power of National Socialism, and also in Hitler's behavior.
A few hours after Röhm's assassination on the Sunday evening, Hitler orders an end to the massacres. The death of his old companion marks the end of the Night of the Long Knives, as well as Hitler's total victory.
Naja, eine öffentliche Meinung in Deutschland gab es.
There was no longer any real public opinion in Germany. The newspapers and the media were in the hands of the regime.
Es wird der Eindruck vermittelt, dass der 30.
One gets the impression that June the 30th was welcomed by the public.
Ob das wirklich stimmt, ist
It is very difficult to determine in hindsight whether this is true. It is certainly true that reaction swung between relief that this scourge called the SA was eliminated,
beseitigt wurde,
but also a certain fear when people heard about all the victims of June the 30th.
Opfer des 30. Juni wurde.
According to what the regime tells us, enthusiasm and joy prevailed over dread, disillusionment, and sadness.
Das Ereignis dann die Schrecken und die Ernüchterung und auch die Trauer überwogen.
To cut short any rumors that might be circulating in public, Rudolf Hess, Hitler's private secretary and number 3 in the regime, intervenes in person the day after the massacres in a speech.
So treu, wie der alte SA-Mann zum Führer steht, so treu steht der Führer zu seiner alten SA. Der Führer hat die Schuldigen bestraft. Unser Verhältnis zur SA ist damit wieder das alte.
The
assassination of Röhm is a physical elimination, but it is also his reputation and his memory that are assassinated. In the days following his death, he is slurred and insulted, slandered and denounced, not only in Hitler's private circle, but also in the press. Not only about the fact that he was guilty of high treason, but especially about his homosexuality. It is a question of destroying his memory, his identity, his honor, and of turning the page on the SA menace in the most violent and definitive way possible.
The annihilation of Röhm must be total. After his execution, his body is carried away in the night, and no one will ever know what happened to it. Tuesday, the 3rd of July, 10 in the morning, hardly 2 days after Röhm's death. From the Chancellery in Berlin, a triumphant Hitler has his government vote on measures of self-defense of the state. In so doing, he legalizes, after the fact, the massacres of the Night of the Long Knives and legitimizes all the crimes that will follow.
There has to be a legal sanction for these acts. That is the meaning of the decrees that are passed on July 3rd, 1934. To legalize the acts of violence acts of murder, even committed as part of the operation called Night of the Long Knives.
Dite Nuit des Longs Couteaux. Il s'agit de dire,
it says, no, we are not just simple hitmen. We are the force of the state acting in legitimate self-defense.
Dans le cadre d'une légitime défense.
Mit diesem Gesetz versuchte Hitler.
With this law, Hitler was trying to cover these terrorist murders by the concept of the rule of law. This is absurd because men have been executed without trial, and the law is now applied retroactively.
Weil das Gesetz rückwirkend angewandt wurde. Aber der
The conservative justice minister did not resign, though. He supported the legislation, which is certainly one of the reasons it was passed.
einer der Gründe, warum man es erlassen hat.
La volonté de légaliser.
The wish to legalize does not necessarily mean that every dictator needs to be lawful and legal. It simply shows that every dictatorship needs consent, and that consent is not necessarily based on laws, but is based on the semblance of laws or on the likelihood of laws.
Friday, the 13th of July, 3 p.m. 10 days after the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler, in a speech to Parliament, delivers his version of events, history rewritten by the Nazis. The next day, the party's official newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, in its front page headline says, "Everyone must know that the fate of he who raises his hand to attack the state will be death." Nazi propaganda was orchestrated by Joseph Goebbels, and the fabricated story of Röhm and his putsch that would have threatened the German state was soon accepted by all. In his speech, Hitler also openly lashes out at Röhm's homosexuality. It has long been known to him, but now he uses it, in hindsight, as an opportunistic argument, as if he were crushing a hotbed of subversion of German purity.
Il y a l'idée évidemment de passer sous silence.
Obviously, the idea is to ignore the few deaths that are perhaps the most important, the former chancellors, the representatives of the conservative wing, etc.,
plutôt de l'aile conservatrice, etc.,
and to reduce the Night of the Long Knives to a pure internal purge of the party, which ultimately gives a much more neutral signal. I cleaned up my house. That's what's being said, and we can see how dependent we are, even today, in the general public or in some books, on these propaganda arguments. The Night of the Long Knives is systematically reduced to what the Nazis wanted it to stand for.
The Nazi propaganda claims that it was a purge to eliminate certain elements of the Nazi movement and thus save the state. In fact, it actually destroyed the last foundations of the rule of law, which had not really existed since 1933. But of course, nobody mentioned that.
Dass man die jetzt erst recht erledigt hat, darüber spricht man natürlich nicht.
Du point de vue d'Hitler,
as far as Hitler building his power base was concerned, there was no need to strike at the SA, because the SA represented no danger. The SA would not have moved, and Rome would have done nothing against Hitler. The danger came from elsewhere.
Il venait d'ailleurs. Il venait du mécontentement de l'armée.
It came from the discontent of the army and the discontent of Hindenburg's entourage with the alleged plans of Ernst Röhm.
Supposé d'Ernst Röhm.
Thursday, the 2nd of August, 9 in the morning. Marshal Hindenburg, 87 years old and president of the Reich, dies at his home in Neudeck. With him disappears the old world of the German aristocracy and the Weimar Republic. Hindenburg was the last obstacle that stood between Hitler and the road to absolute power.
La disparition de Hindenburg a fait sortir du pays.
The death of Hindenburg removed from the German political landscape a figure who, by his aura, remained a protective figure that kept Hitler somewhat in its shadow.
Figure tutélaire dont l'ombre s'étendait un peu sur Hitler. Celui qui avait été le petit soldat.
The young soldier in the trenches of the 1418, who became the great marshal and figurehead of the German army, had established himself as president in the second half of the 1920s.
Comme président dans la seconde moitié des années 20.
As the final tributes are paid to the late president, the government issues a statutory order merging the two posts of president and chancellor in the person of Adolf Hitler. From now on, Hitler converges all the powers.
The constitutional changes that took place a few weeks later, and Hitler's entry into office as president of the Reich. These two events, the crime and the amendment of the Constitution, represent a turning point in the history of the Third Reich. So the crime is part of the foundations of the dictatorship that will prevail in years to come.
Die Partei ist Hitler. Hitler aber ist Deutschland, wie Deutschland Hitler ist. Hitler, Sieg! Sieg!
Le calcul hitlérien.
Hitler's plan worked.
Il voulait définitivement.
He was determined to turn the page on the conquest of power and bring his regime into the apparatus of the state.
Dans
The control of the state apparatus. He has succeeded.
Il a réussi.
He obtains the consent of the ministry bureaucrats, representatives of the business community, and particularly important, from lawyers. The most well-regarded and well-known jurist in Germany at the time, Carl Schmitt, writes an article, "The Führer Protects the Law," describing in great detail why Hitler acted legitimately in a state of emergency. It received support and consent from all sides, and judging by the reports of the banned SPD, there was also some approval among the population.
Dann ist die Zustimmung in der Bevölkerung ebenfalls nicht gering.
Il y a un facteur qu'il faut bien.
There is one factor that must be kept in mind. That political violence and the liquidation of a few hundred people, whether in Germany or abroad, was not such an unusual event in Europe as it may appear to us today.
Dans l'Europe de l'époque, que cela peut nous apparaître aujourd'hui.
À l'époque, Hitler...
At the time, Hitler is certainly a brutal leader, but no one knows that there will later be extermination camps. He is indeed heavy-handed, and his political opponents are in prison. But these are still sovereign countries.
Il y a la souveraineté des pays, et puis il faut le contexte.
And then there's the general context of Mussolini in Italy. So the more we read about that time, the more we realize that when we expect to see international indignation, we are imposing values that were not commonplace at the time.
Hitler finally had no trouble getting people to accept that he'd killed his best friend and fellow traveler from the very beginning. It was the price to pay for the allegiance of the entire state apparatus, the conservative politicians, and more importantly, the army.
The Reichswehr did not directly participate in these assassinations, but it contributed to them by securing, protecting, and helping, thus becoming, in a way, co-murderer alongside Hitler. And as a result, it is at his mercy. That is perhaps the most important aspect for me. For the Reichswehr is no longer an independent entity in Germany, which it was until then.
On Monday, the 6th of August, a final step was taken, one with serious consequences. From that day on, until the end of the Reich in 1945, soldiers will take an oath to Hitler himself. All will repeat these ritual words. I swear by God this sacred oath that I will render unconditional obedience to Adolf Hitler, the Führer of the German Reich and people, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces.
Ich schwöre bei Gott diesen heiligen Eid. Ich schwöre bei Gott diesen heiligen Eid. Dass ich dem Führer des Deutschen Reiches und Volkes, dass ich dem Führer des Deutschen Reiches und Volkes, Adolf Hitler, dem obersten Befehlshaber der Wehrmacht,
Les soldats
The troops are no longer required to take an oath to the Constitution, to the state. They swear an oath to a person, like the militias of the party, like the SA, like the SS, who swear an oath to the person of the Führer.
Ça, c'est une conséquence absolument
This is a really grave consequence because they feel connected in a personal way,
liée de manière personnelle et de manière
in a
sacrée
sacred way,
par le
by the oath to the person, that is, to Hitler's ideas and his orders.
Ce qui va rendre
This will make any rebellion within the German army very difficult, if not impossible.
très difficile, sinon impossible. C'est-à-dire que même à partir
That means that even from the moment the military situation is critical or hopeless, countless soldiers will be unable to free themselves from Hitler's influence because they have sworn personal loyalty.
ils auront prêté serment de fidélité
So
personnelle.
one of the most tragic results of the Night of the Long Knives is this oath of personal fidelity.
Serment de fidélité personnelle.
By deploying its troops in front of the leader of the Reich, the army celebrates his victory, an image of newfound power. All is now ready for what's to come: rearmament, preparations for war, and dreams of revenge. The first victories, though, will soon give way to the bitter taste of defeat, compromise, and guilt. For, contrary to what the military believes, they are not the big winners of the Night of the Long Knives. They have just made a deal with the devil and his henchmen, and they're about to commit the worst of crimes.
There
are two big winners of the Night of the Long Knives. The first is Hitler. He was in a genuinely difficult position with all the various factions that were starting to unite in their criticism.
Le deuxième grand vainqueur, c'est bien sûr l'ASS.
The second big winner is, of course, the SS. And in particular, even more than them, Heinrich Himmler. For Himmler now gets his hands on all the repressive machinery of the Third Reich.
The SS, previously an internal organization of the SA, becomes autonomous. Himmler takes charge of all political police. This is how this association was born between the SD, the Gestapo, the political police, and the concentration camps under Himmler and the SS.
Thus, the Night of the Long Knives will have been the true baptism of blood that foreshadows all the atrocities to come. It was after these 3 bloody days that mass concentration camps were set up, designed on the model of Dachau, and all created and managed by Himmler's SS. Some of them will become Holocaust extermination camps. In Germany, state barbarism has now definitively been imposed, not by the will of the people, but by terror, by insidious machination, compromises, and power games at the highest level.
Dans notre époque où le mot de populisme...
In our day and age, when the word populism is on everyone's lips, A lesson to be remembered is that no dictatorship has ever been established without the support of the state apparatus and its various bodies.
L'arrivée du nazisme au pouvoir.
And that, therefore, the advent of Nazism was not a populist eruption independent of the establishment in which the masses would sweep away democracy and all its institutions, but rather the introduction of a regime enabled by the state apparatus, enabled by conservative elites. If there is one lesson to be learned, it's that the Night of the Long Knives was a step in the shift towards dictatorship and towards the state of barbarism, of lawlessness, in a progressive, insidious process that is not necessarily noticed by people at the time.